Let's talk about the first episode of Hard Knocks. I've got some takeaways, some winners and losers from our first episode with the Jets. And all in all, it was a really good episode, I thought. And I think this is going to be a good season of Hard Knocks. There are a lot of storylines, of course, with Aaron Rodgers coming over. But let's get right into it with my first winner from the first episode, which is Aaron Rodgers. Because we saw, I think, a different side of Aaron Rodgers, right? The national attention on Rodgers over the last 2 years or so is, oh, that's the guy that goes into the cave and does shrooms and comes out and is a COVID denier or something, right? That's sort of been the Aaron Rodgers lens, if you will. But we saw a fun side of Rodgers. I thought he came across very personable, very intelligent. He was dropping dimes in camp. I mean, if you're a Jets fan and you're watching this, you've definitely got to get excited about this upcoming season because Rodgers looks like, vintage. I mean, not even just vintage, just the guy who won back-to-back MVPs not too many moons ago. So, in my eyes, Rodgers came out as a big winner in this first episode. I think it's hard to watch this and not go like, yeah, he looks like a cool dude. I know that everyone has been just dragging him through the mud over the last couple of years, but he came across as a very fun guy and someone that you'd love to have as your quarterback. So Rodgers, in my eyes, he was a big winner in the first episode of Hard Knocks. And he also got to meet the voice of God, as he called him multiple times. What an entrance for the narrator of Hard Knocks, Liev Schreiber. He took a chopper into practice, walked off, and he even narrated his own entrance. It was awesome to see. I love Liev Schreiber. If you've never seen the movie Defiance, fantastic film. Didn't even realize that Liev Schreiber was the voice of Hard Knocks until 2 or 3 years ago, and I was like, that's the guy from Defiance. So it was great to see him finally, break down that fourth barrier, fourth wall, or whatever they're calling it, and actually go to Hard Knocks and practice himself. But it was a fun moment. I was a fan of it. Both guys were fanboying over one another. There was a moment where they're both different type of superstars. One's an athlete, one's a movie star, and they were just kind of like, so how you doing? I'm like, good. How are you? Good. And then just kind of awkward conversation for a second. But Rodgers definitely comes into the season off of what for him would be a bad year last year. And that's kind of crazy to say, but for the Aaron Rodgers standard, 26 touchdowns is on the low side, and 12 interceptions is definitely on the high side. So, quick question here before we get to the rest of my winners and losers. Do you guys think Rodgers will bounce back this season? I mean, if that's the floor for Aaron Rodgers, you know that he's a great quarterback, but do you think he's going to get back to that MVP type of level where it's 35-plus touchdowns and 5 interceptions or fewer? Let me know down with a yes or no. My first loser would be the Crows, right? I mean, Robert Salah, whatever it's called, he gave one heck of an entrance speech where every single season of Hard Knocks, it always starts off with the music coming in, and you're like, let's fucking go. And then it turns to the head coach addressing the whole team, and he's got some analogy. He's got some story. Last year with, Dan Campbell in Detroit, they were biting kneecaps off. You had Jamal Williams saying, if you want to piss like a puppy, stay on the porch. Then you had some great speeches beforehand with other guys and coaches. Gruden, knock if you're with me. For Salah, it was Crows, right? And he talked about the story or the Animal Planet fact of when crows get on an eagle's back, what eagles do is they don't fight them. They just fly to a super high altitude where crows can't breathe anymore, and they suffocate, die, and fall off. And that's going to be the Jets this year. Not the Crows, but which, by the way, for a second I was a little confused as to which animal he wanted to be, but I think he's talking about the Eagles, saying there's going to be people that come on their back. Everyone is either looking at their schedule going, Jets, easy win. These aren't the old Jets anymore. They're going to be the Eagles, which it was a pretty good analogy because Jets, Eagles, they both fly. Flying to super high altitude, and then people falling off their backs because they can't stick with them. So at first, I thought it was kind of, I wouldn't say a corny analogy, but I don't know. I wasn't in love with it initially, but the more I kind of think about it and listen to other people talk about it, I thought it was a pretty good entrance to Hard Knocks. So Crows, definitely losers, and that means any team that plays the Jets this year that thinks they're going to be an easy win, well, Salah's calling you a loser. All right, my second winner from the first episode, I'm going to go with Nathaniel Hackett. He was the Broncos head coach last year. He got fired the day after Christmas after an ass-kicking against the Rams, and he only won 4 games as a head coach in Denver in year 1. Hackett got back to being a cool dude. when the Broncos hired Hackett, everyone raved about the person they were hiring, right? Don't just look at what his offensive stats are and how his offensive ranked when he was the OC. You're hiring a leader. You're hiring the face of a franchise, and Hackett's an awesome guy. That's what we were prescribed, and didn't really work out in Denver. We don't need to rehash that, but it looked like Hackett got back to having fun because last year was not fun in Denver. He got back to being Aaron Rodgers' drinking buddy. I think he is just Rodgers' permanent stunt double, meaning wherever Rodgers goes, Hackett should go, right? What's the movie with the stunt double? No, I'm not thinking of Mission Impossible. This is awful radio. The new Quentin Tarantino movie that came out like 5 years ago. Anywho, got Brad Pitt in it. I'm gonna feel bad about not remembering it. But that's Hackett's job. Just go wherever Rodgers goes, and I'll be curious to see what Hackett goes or where Hackett goes once Rodgers retires in 2 or 3 seasons or however long, maybe just 1 year. But it was good to see Hackett kind of get back and have some fun on the field because last year was not fun, and they even addressed the whole Sean Payton issue in the episode, and it was fun to see how it looked on from their side of things and actually getting cameras there and whatnot. But let me know, will the Jets make the playoffs? Make or miss? Give me your thoughts down below. And hey, if you are enjoying this takeaway reaction video from the first episode of Hard Knocks, consider subscribing. We're putting out free daily content here at Chat Sports, so join the crew. Now, some honorable mentions I want to get to here. Winner number 1 for honorable mention, Zach Wilson. Was eating a PB&J Uncrustable during the halftime of the Hall of Fame game. So Zach Wilson, one of us, just went back in time like we all did. But honestly, Zach Wilson came across as much more mature, I would say, understanding that he is definitely the backup quarterback, and he's taken that role pretty well. I think anyone that was drafted 2nd overall and taken to a New York team knows that there are a lot of attention, lots of media expectations, all that stuff. And for Zach Wilson to crash and burn like he did and bounce back and not hold out or request a trade, but just accept the fact that he's going to be a backup. He should learn from Aaron Rodgers, which you saw him doing in the Hall of Fame game. That was good to see. I also have him down as a loser because it was brutal when Aaron Rodgers walked out to the practice field for the first day of training camp and all of the fans in attendance were chanting Rodgers, and Rodgers looked to Zach Wilson. He's like, "You ever seen this before?" And Wilson's like, "No." Like, yikes. That was tough to see. So if you're Zach Wilson, a part of you's got to be standing there like, this is a bit awkward because I was that guy for the first 2 years, and now I am just a nobody backup that everyone wants to move on from. So he's kind of a winner and loser in my book. 2 other winners I've got, Garrett Wilson, and then I'm going to go with Mrs. Gardner, Sauce Gardner's mom. She wanted to see him graduate. It was kind of a cool, sensitive, touchy subject, story when he went back to Cincinnati, and just a bit of a tearjerker, if you will, if you're a parent. But Garrett Wilson, he's definitely a big winner along with Jets fans because the reigning NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year last season put up 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns in a horrible Jets offense. So to see what he can do with Aaron Rodgers, he might be the next Devontae Adams in terms of production levels, because Aaron Rodgers is going to bring a huge lift to a guy who was already awesome last year with awful quarterback play. So Garrett Wilson, definitely a huge winner. And then Sauce Gardner last year. I mean, the reigning NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year. I kind of forgot that the Jets had both the offensive and defensive Rookie of the Year last season. So Jets fans, definitely a lot to be excited about in terms of what is to come for this team. Whether or not Aaron Rodgers is here for the next 5 or 10 years, which he won't be, you know that you got these guys hopefully for the next 5 to 10 seasons, and they look like bona fide superstars. Here's what I'm going to say about Hard Knocks to kind of wrap up the show. Hard Knocks usually leads to overhype. We always fall in love with a couple of players. We always draft them too early in fantasy football drafts. We buy into the team stock too much. But I think the hype for Wilson and Gardner is real. Like, no matter if they were on Hard Knocks or not, these guys are going to be superstars in this league. They were superstars last year. I don't see them being one-hit wonders. I think you can buy into the hype. I think if you want to draft Garrett Wilson earlier in your fantasy football draft, no one cares about your fantasy team, you can do that now. Meaning you can watch Hard Knocks and go, yeah, this is actually going to be one of those instances where we're not just watching highlights from training camp and then moving him up a round or two and having it not work out. Garrett Wilson, he's going to be good this year. Now, we also got our first look of a Hard Knocks darling, if you will, a roster bubble guy that we're inevitably going to fall in love with and then have our souls crushed when they do not make the roster. But linebacker Chaz Surratt was a draft pick by the Minnesota Vikings, went to North Carolina, made the switch from quarterback to linebacker, came up with an interception in the NFL Hall of Fame game against the Browns. So we're getting some seeds planted as to who are some of the roster bubble guys that probably won't make the roster, but our heartstrings will get attached to them, and we're going to pull for them and hope they do make the roster. One final thought before we call it a show here. Does anyone else think that after watching the first episode, people might be putting Rodgers above everyone else on the roster and even the coaching staff could be a bad idea? Like, it's okay for some of the teammates to fanboy, for Mecole Hardman to be like, hey, dude, I was watching you when I was a little kid. That I can get behind. But Robert Salah acting like Rodgers is, I don't know, the Pope, might come back to haunt them a little bit. Like, sure, it's the best quarterback the Jets have arguably ever had, talent-wise, even if it's just for 1 or 2 seasons. But I feel like if the Jets season does not go well, we're going to look back and go, maybe it wasn't a good idea to put Rodgers above everyone else on the team and make him this god, if you will. We kind of saw that last year in Denver with Russell Wilson. Didn't really work out for them. So I just feel like Salah might be not even anointing, but he might be making Rodgers into something bigger before the season even starts, and that could come back to haunt them. I also just want to look back at some of the recent teams on Hard Knocks because I don't know why. I have it in my brain that it's like the Madden curse. If you go on Hard Knocks, you're going to be bad the next season. That hasn't actually been the case the last few years. I mean, the Lions, for crying out loud, went above 500. The Cowboys won 12 games. I forgot completely that 2020 was a combination of the Rams and Chargers. But the Rams won 10 games. The Chargers were the Chargers. But you had that stretch from the Raiders to pretty much the Rams in 2016 of 7 wins, 5 wins, 4 wins. So let's see if the Jets can continue the trend of Hard Knocks not being what at one point was kind of the kiss of death of you're not going to be good this season. Because the last few years, teams have gone on Hard Knocks and have had pretty successful seasons altogether. Now, if you enjoyed today's recap, like the video for another one next week. We wanted to do this, but our bosses were a bit skeptical of how well it would work. So if you like today's video, if you like the recap, the takeaways, the winners, and the losers, like the video. That way we can show our bosses, let's do another one for episode 2.